In the 2025 New Year address, Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed his expectation for both sides of the Taiwan Straits to work together toward a shared and prosperous future. In recent years, cross-strait relations have grown increasingly complex. To better understand the trajectory of the evolving dynamics, I spoke with Rong Yuan, chairman of Taiwan's Labor Party, the island's prominent left-wing party. Born in 1949, a tumultuous time when the KMT, or Kuomintang, just retreated to the island after losing the civil war, Wu's life has been deeply shaped by political upheavals in the region. As a staunch advocate for communist ideals, he actively participated in political movements that eventually led to his unrest. He was sentenced to death, a punishment later commuted to life imprisonment and eventually reduced to a 15-year term. Reflecting on his political career, does Wu still hold steadfastly to his beliefs? What mark has history left on him? And how does he perceive the current state of cross-strait relations? Here's our conversation. Chairman Wu, welcome to The Point. Could you first recall to us your life story? Why, since very early ages, you have been a firm believer and advocacy of reunification? You even went to jail for 15 years because of your belief.
Back then, the governments on both sides of the Taiwan Strait were in direct opposition. The KMT was defeated by the People's Liberation Army and hence retreated to Taiwan. But the KMT government asserted that it was still the legitimate authority of the whole of China, while the CPC, the Communist Party of China, government on the mainland was labeled as a rebellious one. This narrative led to the declaration of the martial law. So, as we grew up and began to get school education, we were facing a rather awkward reality. China is so vast, and yet the government on the Taiwan island kept claiming to be the representative of the entire country. It was hard to reconcile that. As we later entered into middle school, we started to receive a more systematic education about Chinese nationhood and Chinese culture. By then, we all knew one thing for sure. We were Chinese, and we had been raised with a deep understanding of Chinese culture. During our high school period, we need to learn about the three principles of the people put forward by the founder of the Kuomintang, Sun Yat-sen, as a compulsory and also important part of the educational system established by the then government. One of the three principles was focused on people's livelihood, which basically shared some same concepts with socialism, even communism. And yet here we were being taught that the CPC, who upholds socialism and pursues communism, was the enemy. Moreover, we knew that in the early days, Sun Yat-sen and the KMT had actually cooperated with the Communist Party. The first KMT-CPC cooperation was all about uniting for democratic revolution, and the two parties fought shoulder by shoulder for national unification. Sun Yat-sen's wife, Sun Qingling, was an elder sister of Chiang Kai-shek's wife. If the CPC was so bad, why, after Sun passed away, did she choose to stay in the mainland instead of following Chiang and the KMT to Taiwan? In fact, the CPC treated Sun Qingling with great respect, even appointing her as the vice president of the new China. This was a huge blow to our thinking, and it raised the question, who could truly represent the Chinese nation and which side would our future lie with? I was also exposed to the global currents of thought, especially the student movements abroad. I realized that the Communist Party of China wasn't the negative force we were taught in Taiwan.
Because of your pursuit, because of your belief in communism and socialism, you were actually sentenced to death, which was later reduced to life imprisonment, but eventually you spent almost 15 years in prison. What kind of experience was that? What kept you going?
我们知道，1945年台湾光复嘛，台湾光复就台湾回归。
You see, in 1945, Taiwan was restored to China after 50 years of Japanese colonial rule. When Taiwan was handed back, it was a time of great turmoil. This was the context when the new government was stepping in to take control. The KMT government was the first Chinese sovereign government over Taiwan after it being ruled by outside power Japan for 50 years. There was a strong sense of national identity among the Taiwan people. It's said that when the Kuomintang troops arrived to take over Taiwan, many local people spontaneously gathered at the docks to welcome them and celebrated their arrival. Then came the Civil War. To fund the war effort, the Kuomintang immediately began conscripting soldiers from Taiwan, and they sent both manpower and resources, like grain, back to the mainland to fight the Communist Party. So, after the Chinese resistance war against Japanese aggression, when people in Taiwan thought life might improve under the new administration, the reality was harsh. Not only did life not get better, but the resources were drained to support the civil war on the mainland. This led to widespread discontent and frustration among the people. The resentment was pretty intense.
兵粮都征到大陆去的，所以民怨也是在这1-2年中就不满的，那怨气蛮大的。
During the 1950s, it was a time of intense political purges. Many so-called communists were executed, including quite a few young people in Taiwan, who had been involved in underground activities. So, since we were still young kids, our elders often warned us not to get involved in politics. Then, especially after 1950, white terror gripped the island. Martial law was declared in 1949 and lasted until 1987, more than 30 years. During this long period of military dictatorship, there was a pervasive sense of ideological repression. We were filled with frustration and discontent with the status quo, but we had to keep it hidden while quietly searching for a way out.
探索出路。我那时候在大学，就刚才我讲的那些成长过程中的实相背景。 我们在探索到底我们在台湾我们能够做什么。
In the early 1970s, we were in university, and given the ideological environment we grew up in, we were trying to figure out what we could do in Taiwan. Our group of students was influenced by various thoughts, and we decided to form a communist party. At National Chung Kung University in Taiwan, we connected with students from several other universities. We wanted to establish a student organization, but under martial law, public political activities were absolutely forbidden. We knew that in such a tightly controlled system, we had no choice but to form an underground secret organization.
一开始，而且是被判了死刑，后来才改成。
因为蒋介石过世以后，就减刑嘛，因为我死刑改判无期，然后送到绿岛，那火烧岛，然后。
After Chiang Kai-shek passed away, my sentence was reduced. Initially, I went from death to life imprisonment and was then jailed on the Green Island, or Huoshao Island. After Chiang's death, his son Chiang Ching-te further reduced my sentence to 15 years imprisonment. I served almost the entire sentence, with just 2 months left. Then, Chiang Ching-te granted me parole, reducing my sentence by 2 months. I stayed in prison for 14 years and 10 months.
正好就是台湾解严前后，各种社会力量再重新整合，形成一个要改变台湾社会结构这样的一个运动。
I was imprisoned in 1972 and was released in 1985. By the time I got out of prison, Taiwan was just about to lift the martial law, and different social forces were regrouping. This led to a climate for movements aimed at changing Taiwan's social structure. It was in this atmosphere that I joined the Labor Party, which was in the process of being founded. We laid out our vision and agenda: national reunification and social reform. As for reunification, what should we do about it? Well, our stance was grounded in socialist beliefs. We believed that Taiwan should reunite with the mainland. Regarding social reform, we proposed policies tailored to Taiwan's unique situation, aimed at addressing the island's social challenges. That was the gist of it.
The
Labor Party of Taiwan was founded in 1989. Its founding, in fact, is closely linked to the development of cross-strait relations. The people who founded the Labor Party came from three main backgrounds. The first group was made up of veterans from the resistance war against Japanese aggression during the Japanese rule. As for the second group, while the KMT took control of Taiwan after 1945, the CPC also sent a group of its own to Taiwan. Many young people in Taiwan were influenced by their revolutionary ideas, then became disillusioned with the KMT and aligned themselves with the idea of a socialist China. The third group emerged around the time Taiwan lifted martial law, with various social movements rising up in response to the growing economic and social conflicts. These included environmental, labor, farmer, and women's movements. The people behind these movements, along with those from the previous two groups I mentioned, came together to form the Labor Party.
Mm. 但是就是这么样一个让人很怎么说绝望的这种判决吧，当时死刑，然后无期，那也没有改变您的政治的信仰和信念。因为在绿岛监狱，我们碰到很多。
In the Green Island prison, I met many of the older veterans who had been sentenced during the White Terror in the 1950s. By the time I was sent there, they had already been imprisoned for about a decade or more. What struck me was that despite their long time imprisonment, their spirits were high. They didn't look like prisoners at all and lived a rather routine daily life. I learned from them a lot of well-organized socialist thoughts. So, with the development of cross-strait relations, we remained very concerned about it. We still hope that through social activities, we could contribute to our original goal, which is national reunification. Moreover, a socialist new China has been engaging in arduous struggles to reform itself. We had various indirect sources even back then, showing us how effective the social transformation had been in driving development and building a positive new China. These older veterans believed that this was the right historical path. So, after being released, we all continued to explore ways forward while holding on to that same ideal.
Looking back after so many years, do you think this is still the right choice, that you are still on the right side of history?
It's a good question. We all know why the people of China chose the CPC and why history chose the CPC. We saw a battle between the KMT and the CPC to determine the way forward for revitalizing the Chinese nation. In the end, the CPC earned the people's trust, defeated the KMT, and took over the power. After over a century of national chaos and war, starting from a point of poverty and devastation, it was not easy for China to rise again. So, looking back, I can see that China now has stood up, become prosperous, and grown strong. By around 1980, Taiwan had become closely integrated into the economy of the West, especially with the US and Japan. Taiwan, with its small economic scale, found its niche in light industry and labor-intensive industries. Taiwan's rapid economic development was supported by the U.S.'s political and economic aid. In addition, Chiang Kai-shek had brought many resources from the mainland, including a large reserve of gold to Taiwan. Furthermore, many industries such as textiles, flour, and food from Shanghai, then China's industry hub, were relocated to Taiwan with the KMT. So in the 1980s, there was a significant gap between the two sides, with Taiwan largely leading the mainland in economic development. What was the situation we faced at that time? We tried to convince others that the CPC's victory was driven by a long-term vision for development, and China should follow that road to develop itself. But the reality perceived by people in Taiwan was a stark contrast between the quality of life on the mainland and that in Taiwan. How could they be persuaded that supporting the CPC should be the right choice?
How did you respond?
Starting from absolute scratch, the new China, in order to develop and rejuvenate itself, had to accomplish three major systematic trajectories. First, it needed to build a national self-defense system. In the past, China was bullied and even invaded because it had no military power. So, after the founding of the new China, the first priority was to establish a national defense system. Second, the new China had barely any solid industrial foundation. But for the long-term development, how could you achieve any real progress without them? Therefore, investing in industry is another priority, and people must work hard to establish a solid base for basic and heavy industries. And third, no matter how much you invest in the above two priorities, you should never neglect the improvement of people's livelihoods. You had to figure out a way to feed the Chinese people who had gone through so much hardship. So these three tasks alone were enough to keep the CPC busy. Then, into the 1980s, with the reform and opening up, we saw a new round of social emancipation, unleashing of the productive forces. From 1950 to 1980, under the planned economy system, the groundwork had already been laid. So the reform and opening up quickly brought a new vitality to social and economic activities, leading to a rapid increase in productivity and improvement of people's living standards. So it makes more sense now to talk about the development philosophy and ideology by the CPC, which wasn't easy to explain back then.
How do you look at the visit organized by the Ma Ying-jeou Foundation to bring over 40 teachers and students from 7 universities on the mainland, including the famous ping pong player Ma Long, to pay a 9-day visit at the island? What do you think they're trying to do to the people in Taiwan?
我想今天的两岸关系，我们用
In the context of today's cross-strait relations, the balance of power has shifted significantly. The mainland's emergence as the world's second-largest economy and its growing national strength are widely acknowledged on the global stage. In contrast, Taiwan's position has lagged behind. When mainland students engaged with their peers in Taiwan, the warmth they exhibited was very genuine and natural. It was not contrived or staged at all. These interactions challenged the preconceived notions of Taiwan's youth, allowing them to see that their mainland counterparts are far less distant or antagonistic than they might have initially believed. This connection has become increasingly evident over the past decade of cross-strait exchanges.
那么这样的一个情况，其实这10年来已经都表现在两岸交流中。
The ruling Democratic Progressive Party, however, perceives this trend as a significant threat. They fear that such interactions could undermine the narrative they have carefully constructed, one that portrays the mainland in a distorted, vilified, and alienated light. To counter this, they implement policy measures designed to misrepresent and twist the true intent of these exchanges.
用政策性的手段，故意去丑化、扭曲。
Can you give some examples?
譬如说，他修改 他增修了一个反渗透法，所以只要两岸交流，去到
For instance, they passed the so-called Anti-Infiltration Act. Under this legislation, if you go to the mainland and have any interactions with official organizations there, upon Taiwan authorities' request, you have to submit detailed reports of your activities in the mainland. This imposes additional layers of control on cross-strait interactions.
民间的这种往来形成的一种肃杀的气氛。那两岸交流正好就碰到了那个。
And the so-called National Security Act further tightened restrictions on cross-strait people-to-people exchanges, creating a stifling atmosphere. This was followed by the pandemic, which the DPP used as a justification to impose a comprehensive lockdown, completely sealing off Taiwan from the mainland. Over the course of 3 years, once vibrant cross-strait exchanges came to an abrupt halt.
旅游市场最大宗的，那大陆同胞去到台湾形成的那样的热络景象，让台湾社会
Mainland tourists, who had once been the largest tourist group in Taiwan's tourism market, could no longer visit. Their presence had infused Taiwan with energy. Since relatively few people in Taiwan traveled to the mainland, these visits by mainland tourists had been one of the primary ways that Taiwan society gained some understanding of the mainland's development. This trend also extended to cross-strait marriages, which had become more common as exchanges grew, with nearly 400,000 cross-strait families forming over the years from 1987 to 2018.
他们是无所不用其极，因为台湾是选举政治体制，他们选举要什么？要靠选票。选票的时候，
Taiwan's ruling class has their own collective interests, and to safeguard these interests, they are willing to go to any lengths.
今年吧，今年初
Taiwan's electoral system plays a pivotal role in this dynamic. Elections are determined by votes, and for politicians, they are willing to do whatever it takes to win those votes. Take the 2024 election, for instance.
赖清德为什么
Lai Ching-te secured victory with only 40% of the vote, a significant decline compared to Tsai Ing-wen, who garnered over 50% in both of her campaigns.
背后
What accounts for this drop?
让台
Over the past few years, Tsai's refusal to acknowledge the 1992 consensus has led to increasingly strained cross-strait relations. Meanwhile, the U.S. has been provoking tensions. These actions gradually heightened the sense of insecurity in Taiwan society.
而且政治意识的这样的一种对峙，非常的严肃。
Overall, I believe cross-strait relations are quite unique. Despite decades of separation and serious political and ideological confrontation, when people from both sides interact, a natural sense of closeness often emerges. This connection builds gradually through exchanges, driven by shared history, culture, and blood ties, factors that resonate with human instincts. If the mainland continues to promote the idea of we are one family and adheres to the policy of peaceful reunification, it must work to overcome all obstacles and encourage more exchanges. These exchanges naturally foster goodwill, but it will be a gradual process.
交流中形成的善意啊，它也要一个积累的过程。
Hopefully, in the near future, we'll see the peaceful reunification of the two sides. Thank you so much, Mr. Wu, Chairperson of the Labor Party of Taiwan. Rong Yuan, Chairman of Taiwan's Labor Party. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thanks for watching. You've got the point.